Hey, everybody. It's Joe Trippi. You're stuck with me with the starting this thing off tonight. Rick Wilson will be joining us shortly, but I'm with my good friend, John Della Volpe at Harvard, knows more, and the polling over there, knows more about what's going on with Gen Z and a lot of the groups in this election. John, thanks for being with us.
It's great to be with you, as always. Thank you for having me.
And so, John, I got to start with our nightmare session together. I think you were 25 when I first met you.
Yeah.
I wasn't much older. In 1993, we somehow both found ourselves in Athens, Greece, working for a long shot candidate for prime minister, guy who was 80 years old, Andreas Papandreou. Against an incumbent,
right?
Very popular at the time. I mean, it was starting to decline a little bit, with James Carville, Paul Begala, and Mary Matalin doing the prime minister, the incumbent prime minister's campaign. And you and I were like just two, like literally kids at the time, trying to figure out stuff. And you roadmapped the way we ended up winning that in a massive upset, more seats than I think any party in Greece has won on election night since. But anyway, it's so great all these years later to be talking to you on tonight's show.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, we shared that little apartment where like no one could know our identities. Remember, because Carville, Begala, and Matlin were like on billboards, like the Americans were coming to interfere with our system. So no one knew who we were anyway, but we still kind of had to keep it low. And I think it was a third party candidate. Then as well, you know. But yeah, I was saying maybe we got to dust off that old playbook, right, for the elder statesman of the party, and maybe we can talk about some of those strategies.
Because Andreas, I think we had him. He went out like 3 times in the general election to public events.
He waved.
Yeah, I waved. In fact, I think we have a picture of that with a couple of us in front of him when he was behind us waving.
But you know what? I'll tell you something. That I learned so much, and I'll tell you why. And I think some of those lessons are still very applicable to the way in which I think about research today. Is in those days, we were writing questions and they'd be translated literally into Greek, right? And pollsters would go across the country. Yeah. But because of the relatively recent military background in the government, in the role that public institutions played in the economy, in terms of so many people worked for the government, we couldn't exactly call up and ask people who they were voting for because they were concerned if we were. So we had to find other ways, right, to identify people's attitudes towards political parties, what was important to them, and what would motivate them to vote for Papandreou versus Mitsotakis. So I've always thought that those kinds of questions have much more importance, right, than the top lines that everyone really seems to.
Right. The top lines, that's where I learned too, the top lines don't mean anything. It's underneath the hood, looking deep down into the data.
Yeah.
And I learned that from you in that election. And I remember, Papandreou was old, but his vision for the future, given where the economy was at the time, actually connected in a more powerful way
with younger people.
With younger people than anybody thought an 80-year-old could do. I still remember the Wall Street Journal with that headline saying that Mitsotakis had American consultants, Carville, Begala, Mary Matalin, and that people suspected that Andreas Papandreou did too, but no one knew who they were because we were a bunch of kids. But I remember taking that headline. I think you saw it too. We have a T-shirt that had the picture of us, Papandreou waving behind us with that headline and us there. So I want to get into where we are today and taking some of those things that you learned back then in 92, 93. I remember recently you just posted a postcard. You talked to me about the postcard thing, and let's see if we can get that up for people to look at as we talk about it?
Yeah, so this is a technique I actually learned right around that era. In '92, I did was a small part of a big group that was working for President Clinton back in those days, and I would help with the dial testing. And we dial tested a lot of different things in Dayton, Ohio, and Buffalo, St. Louis, all around the country. And at the end of every session, I would send postcards to everybody and I'd say, write a letter to the president, a postcard to the president. Assume he might read it, right? And we would package them up. And I was told President Clinton would actually read every single postcard. It was like an extremely, insightful way, I think, for him to understand, efficient way for him to understand public. And when I did that, I continued to do that. And this past weekend, 15 of my students from the Harvard Public Opinion Project and I went to Michigan. We're in Dearborn, we're in Oakland County, Macomb County, Detroit, and our last day we had this big town meeting, and I passed out postcards. And this one I think is somewhat emblematic of what younger people are thinking about. I said, write a postcard to the president, assume he'll see it. There was an African American woman in her mid-20s said, here are these 4 things, right? Free Palestine. I'm not going to read them all. Viewers can see them, right? The earth is melting. Her body is her own. She used some other words. Get some seat for the president. She knows it's a tough job. She knows he needs his energy. And then the final thing was, please help me with my student debt. Not because I'm a freeloader, right? But because that's going to be the engine for me to own my first piece of property, the first piece of property that anyone in my family has ever owned, right? And I think that was a pretty good synopsis in terms of where young people, this past weekend in Michigan, were at.
Well, that's what I wanted to get into, and I know Rick will want to get into this when he shows up. But so, what is your perspective of where Gen Z is now? Going into these last 8 months before the November election.
Yeah, well, I've been very fortunate to be running this youth poll now for 24 years, like 48, almost 50 semesters, right? So we have a lot of data points to compare. And relative to this point in the 20 cycle, it's quite different, right? In a variety of different ways. The most important way is folks are just less likely to believe that this matters, right? They're less likely to believe that whatever they decide to do is going to make a tangible difference in their lives. And that's a scary thing. That's a scary thing because they don't appreciate the fact that we live in a different and better country today because of what they did in 2020, right? So that's kind of one piece that needs to be addressed sooner rather than later in terms of the agency and the difference that they could make once. So those attitudes are depressed. That's not good. And the second thing is we've seen a lot of public polling, a lot of our own polling at Harvard, at my company, Social Sphere. It's showing 2 different races, right? One race, which is very tight when we introduce independent candidacies, and we don't know which third party or independent candidate is going to be on which ballot. Okay, but almost to a person, the Biden lead shrinks to basically no lead at all when we introduce Cornel West, Jill Stein, Kennedy, potential no labels candidate, et cetera. Right? Biden is doing reasonably well, and the last poll we did, it looks kind of normal for this stage of a campaign and a 2-person race, right? Whereas a generic Democrat would be in the mid-50s, that's about where he is, right? But it may not be a 2-person race, right? So we don't really know. The big question, the big concern that I have at this point is who's going to turn out, right? And who's going to turn out, and are they going to be, and what's going to kind of motivate them? So that's kind of one part. The second part, though, is that I see, despite the fact that I think the Biden administration has been the most pro-youth, youth-forward administration in all of our lifetimes, perhaps, there's like no recognition of that. Virtually no recognition of that. And I think if there was greater recognition, his numbers could go from the low to mid-50s to kind of where it needs to be in a 2-person race to be competitive on a national basis.
Yeah, I mean, 2 things there. We saw that when I worked for Doug Jones, when where a lot of the young people did not see, like he'd put the Klan away for the bombing at the 16th Street church. And that was like, oh, that's good. But like, hey, you know, like, tell me what you're going to do now or what you've been doing for my generation, not for what you did, back then.
Right.
And so it matters to get that messaging out about what Biden has done. Because I agree with you about probably being one of the best presidents for for the younger generation, and recent, maybe in our lifetime, actually. But the other thing is that we saw in that, and again, going back to that race, a lot of Republicans would in the focus groups actually talk about, particularly women, talk about how they were hanging by their fingernails, clinging to the Republican Party. I mean, barely being able to stay in it because of what they saw as it going off the rails with Trump and racism and all the anger and hatred. And when you ask them, okay, well, but then why the hell are you still there? Why don't you move? They would just kind of look and kind of like look at their shoes and then spit out this like, it would mean I'd have to vote for the first time in my life for that evil, horrible, and they spit out the word Democrat like it was poison. Mm-hmm. And I think both Doug Jones in that race and Biden in 2020 were exactly the kind of personas that made those people go, no, I can do that. I can do that. Now, Biden's been demonized, obviously, since he's been president. But I still think, and you see this in your data, I think, that in the end, those people have qualms about both of them. In a binary decision, still as they did in 2020, still as they did in 2022, stopping the red wave from ever happening, they still move to Biden and against Trump and the MAGA thing until you give them an off-ramp of a third party, of some other option. And then with a lot of them who would vote for Biden, again, holding their nose, obviously, they think it's poison, but they would do that, but they kind of like get this sense of relief in the groups that I've seen, where they kind of go like, great, I don't want to vote for Trump. Whew. I don't want to vote for a Democrat for the first time in my life or for the second time. And wow, there's this off ramp I can take. Mm-hmm. And if too many of them take that off ramp, that's the biggest worry I have about 2024. I wanted to get your insight into whether you think that's right or you worry about the same thing or different things.
No, I think you're 100% right. I think there are a lot of polls that when you combine the third party candidates, it could be a quarter of the vote. And as like I said, it takes a double digit lead for Biden to low single digits, right? So and as you generally find, it's kind of easy to say in polls a year out or 8 months out that you're going to toss a vote to the third party. Everyone looks great. They don't really know too much about those third party or those independent candidacies. I just did a poll where I saw like a tremendous amount of movement specifically from independent candidates when I share, basic elements of what Biden's done, right? When I say, for example, younger people, this is what they tell me. I said, why did you vote in 2020? What were you voting for? And they said they voted for a vision where the president would do three things, right? He would make significant progress on climate, make that a priority for the first time, one, in many years. Two, that he would do something about school shootings and gun violence, and three, deal with student loan, right? As an anchor on millions and millions of families, and when I ask them what he's done, very few people can say anything on those things. I remind them I remind them, of the most significant climate investment in the history of America and the world, and we're making progress halfway towards our goals, right on schedule, net zero goals. I remind them that the first time in 2 generations, we've seen significant gun violence prevention legislation, including a lot of work around background checks and red flag laws. And then, of course, that I think the best kept secret in America today, Joe, is that 137 billion with a B dollars have been relieved in student debt. Creating opportunities for people to save for retirement, to buy a home, to get their car repaired. Something significant impact. And when you do that, I'm seeing these double negatives. The folks who don't like Biden and don't like Trump move by double digits back to Biden,
Right.
and really dissipate that third party. So that gives me a lot of hope. I think there's, I think people are just looking for a little bit of permission. It's not going to be cool. People aren't going to be enthusiastic. It's not going to be that kind of year or that kind of election, right? But I think there's some real tangible results that people got, and they don't want to lose them. We'll see how this develops. But that's kind of the hopeful, the optimistic track I have.
No, I think that's really important because I think Biden has to hit those notes, and I think will, now that we're getting closer to the binary choice, that can move people away from thinking about third parties and understand what this is really all about. Which brings me to tonight's Super Tuesday. I know we don't know any results yet, but I wanted to get your thoughts about the Nikki Haley vote. Is that a vote that is susceptible to coming to Biden? I mean, I have my own views on this, but I really want to understand what you think you're seeing in your data, or if you're seeing anything at all that gives you some idea of where that really is.
So honestly, there's not a lot of data on this that I'm looking at, right?
Well, that's like the data on why you have more hair than I do after all these years. But we'll get into that some other time.
But here's the kind of the broader point I'd be making about Trump, which is what I'm somewhat surprised by, actually, right? Is that there's a group of like potential Trump voters who are younger, right? Who aren't ashamed about it. They used to be less likely to kind of share their views. We used to call them the shy Trump voters. Okay, but they're quite proud of it, right? And they have a different relationship with him, right? Many of these voters were in their early teens when he was elected, right? And that tumultuous first year of Charlottesville and pulling out of Paris and putting Ben on the Security Council and all these sorts of things, right? A lot of people's memories of Trump were positive in their minds, right? And all of the propaganda really has made an impact in their lives, right? So for younger voters, they don't necessarily have those same extremely negative reactions that folks with more muscle memory have. And that is an important thing to consider. It's a very, very important thing to consider, especially among this young group of voters who just have a different experience than others.
And what do you think? If we look forward with the issues, with the things you've talked about, what's your sort of, walk us through how you see this progressing as we get closer to the election? Do things change? Like the economy's clearly getting better, but will people feel it in time? All those kinds of issues that you might be looking at.
Yeah. So, right. So a couple of things, right? I never thought there was going to be a red wave, right? And the reason why.
Neither did I.
Right. And right. The way I'd be interested, right, in what you were looking at, right? What I was looking at is like significant global events that weren't really changing people's attitudes related to the president, right? War in Ukraine, talk of recession, cost of living. The numbers really were within a couple of points. It wasn't significant spikes or decreases. Things were relatively stable. And among kind of the cohorts I looked at, there was not any sort of significant leakage. I just was never buying that red wave. I also don't buy like any much of this economic data regarding like people's views about the state of the U.S. economy relative to who they're voting for. I think that question is almost useless now. It's just really just kind of a partisan metric, right? However, when it comes to younger people, this is something I've done 26 hours of folk groups the last couple of weeks. What I'm concerned about is that the impact of the recession is beginning to now really not the recession, the impact of inflation, forgive me, is beginning to really settle in on younger people. Okay, because they're thinking about their next move, and they're thinking about a house they can't afford, rent they can't afford. Some people are making highly personal decisions about whether or not they should move in or get married for the sake of double income compared to what they really want to do, right? They're having significant conversations about marriage and about kids related to this economy. There isn't a focus group that I don't do, randomly selecting voters, Democrats, Republicans, Independents, where a couple of them haven't been or will concerned that someday they soon could be homeless. Okay, so we've got this like these existential threats about economic security that just wasn't in the mix as far as I could see in 2020, 2018, that could play a significant role here. So this idea of financial stability is still very, very present, maybe more present than some of the other issues for a big group of voters. And that's where I think Biden really needs to connect. He really needs to, and I hopefully we'll hear this tomorrow night, right? He really needs to channel that frustration, that pain, that struggle, that stress, and talk about what he's been doing, right? The first ever Renters Bill of Rights, part of the IRA. Very few people know about that. So I think this deep economic concern is something that seems to be getting graver by the day, despite the fact that the economic news, 401ks, et cetera, is much more positive. Keep an eye on that.
Yeah, no, I never thought the red wave was coming because when I looked under the hood at the numbers, and look, we had. I understand what you're saying about how people are being hit today by the economy and their worries, but in 2022, gas prices were like sky high. Inflation was out of this world compared to today, and the economy was like crap. I mean, literally just crap.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
So in that scenario, the data all should have been every Democrat
Right.
getting their butts kicked and us losing massively, Senate, House races, everything. But every time I looked at the head-to-heads, where Biden was on the economy or where the economy was didn't have any. I mean, getting back to your point that question now has become kind of worthless in terms of determining this stuff. That doesn't mean that Biden doesn't have to do or that we don't hope that he does what you're talking about at the State of the Union and addresses it. And he has been, student loans and other things. But I do think Dobbs, there's a whole bunch of, this is, and that's why I'd like to get you to talk about this. We as pros in this stuff, I mean, who've been doing it for years, understand the concept of cross pressure. Mm-hmm. Understand that the young woman in a suburb who cares deeply about her reproductive freedom and abortion bans and the IVF stuff that's going on in Alabama and the Republican Party and Trump in the Supreme Court, and at the same time has these questions you have about, am I ever going to be able to afford a house? I mean, that's a cross pressure thing that I think you're right. If Biden can start addressing, here's what I'm doing for you on that thing that you've got this big worry and concern, and I'm working on it. And we didn't get all straight, all right. We couldn't, we had hurdles from the Republicans, et cetera, but I'm getting that done. I don't see how Trump solves the other part of that cross pressure. So I just want to get your thoughts, and maybe as a pollster, you could explain to people how that, how that can work for Biden in the end.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, the way I look at this is that very few people are excited to vote for someone who's 80 years old to be president. We know that, okay?
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, we've got two records, right? We've got two records to right, and I'm hopeful that people will understand, okay, when communicated by their peers, and you taught me as much as anyone on this, back from your work in 03, 04, that if basically that younger people are looking for permission, I think, Joe, right? They're looking for permission. There is a dozen significant things that the Biden administration has accomplished, right? And each of those things, as important as they are, could be taken away immediately, okay, if Trump is elected. $137 billion. Not everyone has gotten, student loan relief. I can tell you something. There's no chance of it happening if young people don't vote for Biden, right? We're not near. We're making progress on climate. We're not where we need to be. It's all going to be reversed, right? If young people don't vote in November, right?
Right.
So that, I think, is the message that is going to have to be communicated like kneecap to kneecap by younger people around the country. And setting the tone at the State of the Union where Biden, people don't expect Biden to understand them. Okay.
Right.
But they want him to empathize. And I think he does empathize, and we'll see if that comes out in the address in the address tomorrow night. But you're right. It's going to be like, do I really feel confident? Was it really that much better economically under Trump? Right? Is it really worth giving up? What's happened in terms of women's rights and reproductive rights, et cetera. But in order to even have that argument, you need to talk about this record, and it needs to happen where people need to feel comfortable. Again, having that conversation to their friends and their peers. It's not going to happen from people like us. It's going to happen from our kids and their friends.
Yeah, no, I've always believed that the current younger generation, Gen Z, and moving up that age group, but that's going to be the group that saves democracy. And if they really want, climate, making real progress on any of the things that really matter. Right. To them, they're living in that future. I think they're going to come out. I think they're going to save us. And if they don't, then we're gone. I mean, so it's a call to that. And I think Biden may be able to make that call pretty eloquently in the State of the Union and going through now to November. Look, we're coming. I'd like your final remarks on that. We're coming up on half an hour, and so I want to hear if there's anything I haven't asked you or something you want to say about this generation or where you think we need to go. I'd love to hear it, John.
No, I listen. Right, the book here. Right, the book. It's called like Their Fear and Passion. How Gen Z is channeling their fear and passion to save America. Right, so they are going to save America. And what I want you, there you go.
Oh, wow. That's great.
What is so important to appreciate is that we have this moment today where you have roughly 40. Here's the thing. We think about this country being divided. It is, okay? It's better though to think of this divided by age, okay? Basically, 60% of people under the age of 40, 45 years old, have a set of values that comport with Biden and the modern Democratic Party. The other half of the country, over the age of 45 or so, have values that more align with Trump and the Republican Party. That was the case in 18, 20, and 22. 40% of the electorate is under 40 years old, 42 years old. It is therefore incumbent for all of us who care about these issues, right, to make the case to motivate as many of these young people together on these shared common values, okay? The numbers are there to do that. The biggest concern is where I started. They don't see the positive progress that's being made. All of this has been desensitized. They're desensitized to all of these scandals. And it's really just incumbent upon all of us to show people the difference that engagement can make. If those things happen, I think it's a lot of pressure for young people to save us. Okay, but I think that more people participate, think like this. I think we'll be in good shape.
So, John, where can people find you on, online or on, at a website to look at the polls and other things that you've been working on?
Yeah, thank you. A couple different places. So my Twitter and Instagram is at Della Volpe. I have a Substack, JDV on Gen Z. So I'm posting a lot of data and analysis there. All of our work at Harvard is available at the Harvard IOP website. Check that out. And I appreciate, as always, the opportunity to kind of share these views and to hopefully, do the best I can to kind of share the views of what I think is the most special generation we've seen in maybe 6 or 7 decades.
Yeah, no, and I urge everybody to get the book, Fight. It's about how Gen Z is their fears and passion to save America, which I totally agree with John. And when I read his book, I was just like, yeah, this is that generation. And I've learned so much from you over the years, and just still have a big smile on my face from wandering around Athens with you. And gosh, so many years ago. But thank you, John, for being with us. And I guess we got through with Rick Wilson lists, but there's plenty of things, folks, for you to go to Resolute Square. There's merch there. But more importantly, Rick Wilson's The Enemy's List is a must listen. Decoding Fox News, Zero Line, that Trippy show. I do my best every Friday. Thanks, John. But again, we'll see you next week on another strategy session. John Della Volpe, gosh, thank you so much. It's been great to be on with you.
Love it. Thanks, John.
Take care, everybody. We'll see you next week.